Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to this month's webinar. We're really privileged to have Blair Parks with us today. The topic is issues and opportunities when entering and endeavoring to scale in the U.S. This is a topic that we hear a lot from many of the ventures that we meet in terms of both those that are considering coming to the U.S. and those that have come and really wish they had understood some of the best practices before they come. So for those that haven't been on one of our webinars before, it's a pretty straightforward format. My name is Bill Kenny too, and I should say that, Bill Kenny from Meet. But what we're going to do is Blair and I will chat for 20 or 30 minutes, something like that. And you all have given us many questions as well to consider and respond to. So we really want to get to those. And we'll definitely spend plenty of time on those. We also, and Blair has talked about in our pre-conversations about, for some that have more specific questions, about maybe sending out some of their information that might be really beneficial. So let's look at this as a starting point to this conversation. There may be other topics within entering the U.S. that we bring to you all, and but let us know how this goes. What are the questions you have? And we're more than happy to add additional experts into the funnel to help deliver good content for you. So without further ado, let me introduce Blair Parks. And Blair, you're one of my friends who has a very long title, which I love. So Blair, you are the U.S. Business Manager, Mayor's International Business Program with an E at London & Partners. So well, first of all, hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you? And actually, my title should be a little bit longer because now I'm the U.S. and Canada Business Manager. So, yeah.
We can't say North America. It has to be U.S. and Canada.
Defining that, yes.
Well, congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about London & Partners first, and then I can go into what the Mayor's International Business Program does. Yeah. So London & Partners is the Mayor of London's official promotional agency, and we exist to support the mayor's priorities by promoting London internationally as the leading city in the world to invest, work, study, and visit. So we do a lot of really great things, and we have offices all around the world. We have offices in China, in India, in France, Germany, and in North America. A lot of my colleagues around the world, a main focus of theirs is foreign direct investment. So they support international companies who are looking to set up in London. However, I work on the flip side of that, on what we call the trade side of our business. So what that means is I work for the Mayor's International Business Program, which falls under London & Partners. And so the Mayor's International Business Program is a 12-month program. We are funded by the European Regional Development Fund. We're a free program. And so our program helps high growth, ambitious scale-ups who are looking at setting up internationally. Our criteria for companies to join that program is they must fall into 4 different sectors. That's life sciences, creative, urban, and technology, which you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that doesn't fall in those sectors. We also work with companies that have a minimum of 10 employees, £1 million in revenue, or £1 million in investment, and can demonstrate that they've grown by 20% year on year. And so my role within the Mayor's International Business Program is to support those companies in our program who are interested in North America, in the US and Canada. There's a ton of interest within our program for this market, and so I'm very busy, and it's great to have partners like you.
Well, it's exciting to have you with us today. And I think you had mentioned when we met actually in London that there are 60 companies per quarter that enter a cohort to look at coming to the U.S. and Canada and learn and go through your curriculum to develop whether or not it's the right fit for them and if they're ready and all those kind of good things. But
exactly. So we take 60 to 70. It's a lot of companies on our program every single quarter, and we call them cohorts. And so we've done 11 cohorts so far. Our next cohort launch is in March. And then let me go into a little bit about how we support companies. So we support companies through a variety of different ways. We do a lot of events over in London and a lot of workshops. And so we do a lot of events that are titled Meet the Corporates, where we bring corporates, international corporates, through our doors to link them up with our companies. We bring international cities who are interested in linking up with London companies through our doors. So right now I'm speaking to Dallas, to Phoenix, to Chicago, all these different places who really love London. And then we also do a lot of mentoring. So mentoring is really huge in linking the companies we have up with people who've done it before, who's expanded their company to China, to North America. And then we also run international trade missions. And so I'm personally responsible for the North American trade missions, so anything that goes to the US and Canada. But we also run trade missions to China, to India, to France, and to Germany, to places which it's really great because you kind of have your hand held a little bit in going to those markets, especially to places like China and India that might be a little more difficult to build your networks from London. So people find that really useful.
Cool. Well, let's get into our topic, and it's great to have you with us again. We have people, just so there's context here, we have people from all over the world that are with us and also will view this later as well. And there are some folks who are considering bringing their companies to the U.S., some who are already here. And then also we have folks that are in a trade or economic development role who are looking to glean some of the wisdom as well. So let's hop in. And so the first question I have for you is, and it's kind of a basic one, is how do leaders decide if their company is ready to enter the US and or Canada, now that you have that hat on as well?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, this advice applies to anybody looking at this market, whether you're in the UK or Spain or China. So a big question, I think the main question you need to ask yourself is there even a market in the US for your product or service? I mean, for example, the US's healthcare industry is very different to most of the world's. And so in that sector, there may not be a fit for you. However, there may be an awesome fit for you. So identifying that first is really important. Another question I think you need to ask yourself is, do you know your competition? So can you compete in this market? And if so, is there market share left if you do have competition? So those are two really large questions I think companies need to ask themselves right off the bat.
And so how do companies get the answers to those questions? I would imagine there are a variety of tools or resources or whatnot that, everything from coming into the market to using a market research company or whatnot. How do you normally what do you see as the best mode to figure that out?
Well, you need to do your homework. I mean, and do your research. And I think consulting with people like me, and I know a lot of European countries and countries around the world have support similar to me, who can help you identify. Speak to American companies, speak to your American friends. Americans, we're everywhere. So really, really do your homework. I mean, there's no shortcut, unfortunately. It is doing that market research. It's coming to the U.S. and coming to the U.S. often. It's really committing to this market. And then a point about when you do come to this market and you're setting up meetings with prospective clients or stakeholders like me, if you could kind of sell as an American, you need to send me an event or a meeting invite in my time zone, in the US time zone. You need to send me a US dial-in so this phone call doesn't cost $100. So it's paying attention to that stuff will leave a big impression.
That's cool. That's really cool. And then I would imagine, as let's assume a company has sort of figured out that there is a market for them. You had alluded to the fact that there may be some strengths and weaknesses that they have. How do they do gap assessment to sort of figure out what additional skills or resources, partners or whatnot they might need when they enter the U.S.?
I would say, well, visiting the market and going to networking events, networking hard. Building your network is the most important thing I think you can do. And so asking and taking on mentors and speaking to people like me again is really another strength and a gap you had mentioned earlier. Something that people should look at is don't always look at just New York or San Francisco as the place to set up. There's a lot more resources in cities outside of New York and San Francisco that are available to international companies. So if you want to know more about, the market or whether you'd be a fit, places like Dallas have time to speak to you. Places like Atlanta have an awesome, client pool, and they have so many resources and data available to you. And so if that's something you'd be interested in, I always recommend looking at other tier cities. And while Atlanta may be like a tier 2 city in the US, it's bigger than a lot of European cities and countries around the world. So
I think it's still the largest airport in
yes.
the country.
Yes.
Is Atlanta. So yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, certainly a great, easy place to fly into. Lots of flights.
So actually, a really example, on Atlanta, real quick, I just thought of is I had a company who they had a few clients in the U.S. and they, just assumed as a fintech, financial technology, that they needed to be in New York. They never stepped foot in Atlanta, but I was like, you know what? Like, you guys aren't, you don't need to be in New York necessarily. Go to Atlanta, see what it's all about. They were blown away. Atlanta had the resource and some incentives, and they showed them around the city, something that would never happen in New York at this point. And then they're setting up there. So be open-minded is really important.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess when a company is assessing what market in the U.S. to enter first, what are the criteria they should look at?
I think you should look at, well, first of all, where the sector is the strongest. So if you're a life sciences company, San Diego, Boston, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Nashville is really very, very strong in life sciences. So do your homework. There's so many different places that are suitable for different sectors. See where your client base is. If you already have clients in the US, I was speaking to a company recently who, again, assumed they should be in New York. However, they looked at the data and most of their clients were in the Midwest. So looking at Chicago, looking at Dallas now. So look at your client base. Look to see where, because the East Coast and the West Coast, as you'll know, are dramatically different places. And so see culturally as a fit. I find the East Coast to be a little more similar culturally and pace as London in the UK. And it's also only a few hours. It's just as far almost to London as it is to California. And so sometimes it is easier to be on the East Coast. You also, if you have investors, will need to get their opinion on where you should be setting up. Yeah,
cool. So tell me about some of the mistakes that you see companies that you work with make as they're looking to come to the U.S. Let's maybe even chunk this because there are probably a few different interesting stories. Let's think about sort of before they sort of enter, sort of on the preparation side or on the discovery side. What are some of the mistakes you see companies make?
I would say when interacting with American customers, showing that you have a commitment and you're looking at the US and not speaking in their language. I know, the US and the UK speak a similar language, but not speaking in their language, not sending them an invite in their time zone, not being in their world is a really big mistake. I think going on fact-finding missions to the U.S. is really awesome. I do think people should be coming to the U.S. and understanding the market as much as possible. But I don't think if you're on a fact-finding mission, I don't think it's appropriate to go and meet with VCs yet if you're not ready to. You don't want to use up those introductions. You don't want to use up those client business development meetings if you're not ready to deliver.
Cool. So, and then, and you actually brought up something I think that we want to spend a little time on, which is sort of the notion of localizing your communication, localizing your marketing and your approach. What do companies do in that regard? How do they, and are there things that you support them with in terms of localizing their sales and marketing?
Well, I personally, as an American, I will often take a look at like the companies I'm working with, their websites, and see if I feel like it serves me. Often there'll be a word on the first page that is very much not an American word or an American phrase. I think it's worth consulting with some US marketing firms so I can make those introductions for companies. There's the US, I mean, New York specifically has some amazing marketing firms that really touch small companies, big companies, everyone. But yeah, it's talking to Americans, putting your product in front of prospective US clients. If you're ready to deliver the service, if you're ready to support them and market, and getting their opinion. I think Americans are, for good or for worse, are very open and love to ask questions and love to get everyone's opinions. I find that other cultures are a little more hesitant about doing that, but that's just really important.
Gotcha. Cool. So yeah, getting into the local language, and how, I mean, the U.S. obviously is a big country. Mm-hmm. How important is it to localize regionally? I mean, you localize for the U.S., but do you find that it's important also to localize regionally to, the southeast or southwest or northwest or whatnot?
I think it's not as much important to localize regionally. I think it's important to have a U.S. address on your website. I do think that's important. A lot of Americans value being able to get in contact with someone in their home market. I'll give you an example, actually. So while Canada and the US have many similarities, we're very different countries. I think sometimes we're looped in together. So I'll give you an example. A company I spoke to recently, their main clients they're targeting are small businesses. So think like mom and pop hardware stores in the US. A lot of those are in the South and the Midwest. This company decided to put their customer service and their sales operations in Canada. So the thing about the US and small business owners and people in small towns are unlikely to pick up a phone call from Canada, and that was proven. Unlikely to call Canada. Are a little wary of talking to anybody international about their needs. And that's just a fact. That's the way it is. And so if that's who you're targeting, and so since then, the companies had to move that center to the U.S., which is a waste of time and money, obviously.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, and for those that don't know and who are on the webinar from places internationally, it's actually a long distance call for most of us in the U.S. to call Canada. So yeah,
people don't understand that. Yeah,
huge resistance to that, and things like WhatsApp are not nearly as common here. If you travel internationally, you have WhatsApp and you're very used to using it, but not nearly as normal as somebody using Europe or in
yes, exactly.
or Asia.
Well, speaking of brands that don't exactly transfer necessarily, is another thing that's really important for your marketing and what you have on your website is it's all well and good that you have some amazing European, Asian clients, it's really great. But if Americans do not recognize those names, then it doesn't matter as much. So we do recognize BBC, but we don't know what Deliveroo is. Deliveroo is massive in the UK, but Americans have never heard of it. So it's important to pick those clients that will have name recognition in the US.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So we talked about kind of some of the challenges companies have before they enter, and then are there certain things that you see that obviously there are some companies that come to the U.S. that don't end up staying, and they fail to sort of get traction for a number of reasons. What are some of the most common reasons that you see that once they enter, companies don't gain traction?
Okay, two things. Sometimes I don't think people have budgeted properly. So your expansion is going to be more expensive than you think. The talent you're going to hire is going to be more expensive than you think. Salaries are generally higher here than a lot of other countries. It's also incredibly competitive. So you're going to need to pay the price to get the talent you need. Another huge thing that happens is your first hire. So your first hire in the US is so important. And I've found lately, a lot of the UK companies I work with are moreover now sending a UK staff member, senior staff member over to the US to set up the business. And that's going very well. historically, in the last few years, 5 years ago, I was hearing more the first hire being an American salesperson. And while you do need that American salesperson in your business, I don't often recommend it as the first hire, because if you send over someone from your home market, that person can transfer the culture, can make sure the product is being sold the way it's intended, product or service. If you hire the American salesperson, those things can go wrong, but also that person has often felt isolated. They often don't feel attached to the company, so they might not have as much buy-in or work as hard in some cases, which is unfortunate. And so if you do go with that first American salesperson, then send somebody over often to visit them. Make sure they're coming back to visit your home market, so they feel an attachment there and they know people and they can recognize people by face. So I think that's just so important.
That's really great advice, because we see that challenge for companies we work with quite a bit, in terms of those that hire an American first or have a whole American team, and the reverse of where bringing someone in from the home office. Both have their challenges, and it's just figuring out how to properly bridge them, for sure.
Exactly.
And it's also situational. I mean, not everybody has somebody willing and ready to go from the home office, and you don't want to take them off what they're currently working on either.
Exactly. Which in that case, then make sure you just invest a lot in that first person on the ground if they're an American, and make sure you have the money to let them come over to your home market, to your headquarters. Make sure you have the budget for that.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I want to talk through, you had sort of jotted down a bunch of questions that you ask companies around their readiness to move, and then I want to get into our audience questions. So you had kind of given a bunch of these questions. So, is your business solid and stable in your home market? What are some of the, when you measure sort of solid and stable, what does that mean? What are, if we bring that to life a little bit, what?
Well, the most obvious one is really financially stable. And is your company, do you have buy-in from your employees to support an international expansion? Do you have the HR support to do that? Do you have your CFO and your chief legal officer? Or do you have the buy-in from them to spend the time that it takes to set up properly? Because it takes a lot of work. So it's that, and it's mainly budget. It's expensive. And do you have the time? And so I think a lot of people don't realize how much you're going to have to travel back and forth to get this office set up. So it's making sure that you're in a time of your life, whoever's responsible for getting that office open, you're in a time of your life where you can commit that time and energy.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I'm almost imagining sort of an hourglass, and thinking about, right, you've got only so much sand in the hourglass to, because if and for every situation, it's different, but it might be a year, it might be 18 months or 2 years or something like that. But you only have I would think, based on what you're describing, only a certain amount of time for the office to catch fire, for it to succeed and flourish, because, well, you might run out of money, you might lose investor support, you might not be able to retain people if they're not sort of getting their bonuses and things like that. That obviously in growth companies, that's a huge component. But do you see that as sort of is that metaphor a good one? Sort of the
100%. I completely. I mean, it's going to take a long time, but it can't take too long, because people will see if you have job descriptions hanging out online for a year. That looks bad. It looks like a company you might not want to work for. If you're telling your prospective clients or your already clients that you're coming to the U.S., it doesn't look like you have your house in order if it takes a very, very long time. And yeah, you're right. Hourglass, you're going to run out of money. Yeah.
Well, it's resources in some form or another. And probably just as important is just even management's commitment to, having to keep coming over. And, it's probably difficult in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
And we talked about the bringing someone into the new market, but you asked them questions about with what they're doing, is it particularly necessary to do that, and can they meet their goals digitally. And so you find there are some companies that can actually do it virtually, or do they, even if they don't move somebody over, do they need to fully commit to having some frequency of having somebody from the home office come? Is that right?
Yeah,
From
it's
what you
more
said
like,
earlier.
is it time for you to be investing all this energy and this money into setting up in the US? Can you meet, yeah, exactly. Can you meet your goals digitally? Are you taking on US clients without having someone there yet? I always recommend putting someone in the US, but if it's too early and if it's not time yet, you might not have to yet. I know sometimes companies will see some opportunity. You know, they think, oh, I'm going to go to San Francisco because I see, you know, all these companies and it's a hot time to be there. But if it's really too soon or it doesn't make complete sense for you yet, like just wait.
Yep.
I recommend waiting. Yeah.
Cool. So, you've mentioned money several times during this. How do that obviously that will be very different by company. How do you help, or how does a company evaluate how much money they need, or is it just pick a number and multiply it by 10? Whatever you think.
Right. So it depends on your business. It's very situational, but it also depends on where you want to go. So are you open to being in a co-working space in New York? It's going to be a lot cheaper than getting a rent and having to pay electricity and all these other crazy things that New York landlords have you buy. Or are you willing to go, co-working space in Atlanta or in Chicago or in Boston or somewhere else? That's huge. It's how much are you willing to spend on that? And salaries it depends on the city, how much you're going to need to pay your employees. However, you need to pay for people's health insurance. You need to put into the further 401k. There's a lot of things you need to look at. And I can certainly advise people on what exactly they need to look at, but it's the accountants and HR advisors. You need to invest money in taking on stakeholders that can take you through that. Because you're going to need to have a competitive employee package in order to get the best talent. And that will range on how much that is on who you're looking to get. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe one more of your questions that would be interesting to go through. And one of the questions you ask companies is the U.S. market the next best milestone for your company? What's the assessment there? How do you help them go through that milestone discovery?
Well, I usually ask this question because I find that, the U.S. is a really exciting market. There's a lot of activity here. There's perceived to be a lot of money here. I sometimes see international companies see it as like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow as far as investor money. But it's really just, what about Europe right now? You know what I mean? Like, what if, Europe's a great place to set up an additional office if you're in the UK. Look at Canada. US is not always the place. So you need to go through all those other questions. Do you have competition in the US? Is there a market fit? All these things. Because the US might not be the next best milestone. I know it's exciting. I know there's a lot of potential clients here, but there is in Canada as well. Canada's a great market to do business. And Europe right now with what's going on politically, it might make sense to put someone over in Europe. Like it really, really depends on the company. Yeah.
I suppose a smaller step, whether it's going into some areas of Europe or to Canada, and maybe not Canada as much, but maybe Europe, where, speaking specifically about a UK-based company, the logistics are considerably easier. The time zone separation is easier, and the common passport is just the variety of things probably. Maybe allow a baby step, a practice in preparation for that potential bigger step later on.
Exactly. And you might look at your client base again. Look at, like, if you have a website, where's your traffic coming in from? Where are your clients? If you have a consumer facing, if it's more product based, I find that companies sometimes don't drill into that data and they're just very excited about the US market. Germany could be your biggest market, look into that.
Right. And your point here from what and certainly our past conversations isn't to discourage anyone from coming to the US. It's just saying sort of measure twice, cut once, right? We want to make sure that it's the right fit and that you're ready. Because quite frankly, when you come, we want you to be really, really successful, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. So
I'll often have clients expand to Asia or to Europe first and then come to the US.
yeah.
So there's not just one way to do it. Yeah, exactly.
Sure. And as you said, situational. You have to figure out your best answer.
Right.
And maybe they have family here, or if there could be a great support network beyond the economic development support networks and so on. So let's just assume a company has gone through this, sort of 20 question gauntlet and and maybe more like 1,000 question gauntlet to figure it all out.
Yeah.
And they've come out of it, and sort of the crazy 8-ball says, go to the U.S. Kind of what's next? What are how do they work through? And let's talk specifically about your programs. How would you help a company from there? They've made the decision. They maybe have picked the city that they're going to make their beachhead. What else? What in your programming would help them be successful from there?
So what we do in our programming is helping to connect people into networks. And so the thing about places like New York is there's so many different associations and networking groups and, even investor created groups that serve European or Asian founders that live here, or British companies that have a presence here. So take advantage of those networks. Take advantage of, the French business club. I know it exists here. Take advantage of Octopus Ventures, for example, has a European founders club. The UK government does a lot of events where they invite British-owned companies. So look into see what networks you have that you can take advantage of because you're not US headquartered. And for me, it's linking them into the networks and letting them know what's available. There's also, for example, if you go to Nashville, there's a wonderful Nashville Life Sciences association that you become a part of that will help you link into groups. Go to as many events as you can, meet as many people as possible. I can help you alert you to what's good to go to in the US and what maybe you shouldn't. So I think some people really enjoy going to the CES, but sometimes it's not a fit for everyone just because it's it's big. It's South by Southwest is another great example. It's very fun. There's a lot of potential business connections there, but it's also incredibly saturated. So is it right for you at this time? Is there something a little smaller? There's a really cool conference going on in Toronto called Collision. That is a really fast growing conference. It's very big, but that one is so young at this point that I find people find it really valuable. So it's asking me and asking people like me of where are those networks that are actually useful.
Cool. And if anyone on the webinar doesn't know Collision, you may know Web Summit, and it's the same host organization that runs Collision as Web Summit. So and it's in May this year, right? It's sort of I think the third week.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I actually have one more thing as well. You can, while I do recommend people when they're ready to set up in the US to visit the market as much as possible, you can also get a lot of research done online. And so, for example, in New York, there's digital.nyc. It's this great website with all the events you could go to. It also talks about news and what's trending here and what people on the ground are talking about. So really get your head into that space. Because when you go to meetings in New York, we're going to be talking about, Amazon just is setting up in New York and the problems we may or may not have with that, So get on the ground knowledge and figure out what's going on and what people care about.
Yeah, and I would imagine too is we all want to go to events to build our business network, but also I would imagine helping your team, particularly those that are coming in from offshore, helping them assimilate to a new marketplace, make friends, and have all the things that a social network can provide beyond the business benefits, because obviously we want to retain people too, and those networks can support sort of us 360, I guess.
And it's nice that too, and that if you make some friends who have gone through it, they can tell you things to avoid. For example, JustWorks is a big HR platform that people use in New York. And when you get your W-2, which is a tax form, it lists all this information that the US government usually has a problem with. So I found a lot of UK founders having a little bit of trouble with getting some things renewed because of using this platform. It's a great platform, but they would be, my point is, I guess, is they would be able to warn others of the conversations they've had, and so they can have the answers at the ready. Yeah.
Sounds perfect. Yeah. So why don't we hop into our audience questions? And for the audience that is putting in additional questions online, I will, while Blair is responding to questions, I'll endeavor to pull up your questions on my phone here. Because we had the last minute switch in links, I didn't have that pre-set up, and the unfortunately we don't see on our screen your questions. I have to actually log in as a user to see the questions, which is a odd thing about Google, but hey, what the heck? It's all fun. So Blair, the first question, it's really probably a group of questions that people asked, was the access to funding for startups or scale-ups that are coming in from offshore in the U.S. market. What thoughts or recommendations do you have there?
Sure. So I have some general comments and then some recommendations. So in general, I find that it is much harder to get in front of VCs in the US than it is in Europe. I can't really speak to the Asian markets. And to get in front of a US investor and also to get funding from that investor, it is not always a requirement to have an existing US office or existing US customers. However, I'm finding in the conversations I've been having with UK founders who are getting funding, they have been asked to set up a US entity and put someone senior over on the ground pretty quickly. And so you need to be aware of that. You need to make sure the timing is right when approaching investors. And so, as I said earlier, I know it's great to come out and fact-finding emissions, but that might not be the right time to use up that one introduction to that investor. And as is always, warm introductions to investors are always the best. I know that that's sometimes hard to come by, but that's important. That's another one I have. So my advice when looking for investors is you need to find the right investor, not just whatever you can get. I think it's better just to not have anything if it's whatever you can get. And US investors have their entire home market to choose from. So you need to be exceptional. And, don't be afraid to be more American about it. You can say you're the best and say you're awesome because the Americans that you're up against are saying that. So don't be afraid to use that language. And when looking at investor, look at a U.S. investor's history, align with their investment appetite, look at who they've invested in previously and their fund profiles. And really, really importantly, and how a lot of the companies I work with that have found the investors that they're working with, is they've looked to see what investors have invested in European startups. That applies to Asian startups as well. What investors have historically invested in companies in Asia. So look into that. That's something, a big way to find investors.
And do you have resources to help make some of those connections or do some of that research?
So to be honest, US investors are not interested in one-off introductions. They have teams of people who do research to find the best of the best. And they will take meetings if a company's persistent and has a good sell. But they're not interested from stakeholders. I mean, I know a lot of investors and we work with them, but the way that we work with them is through events. And so most of the investors I work with want to touch a lot of people at one time. They're not interested in having one-off meetings just based off of a recommendation from someone. And so that's the way we engage mostly is through panel events, through roundtable sessions where one investor can reach many.
Got it. We may have covered this question, but please feel free to add anything if there's something additional. What are the best strategies to overcome or avoid challenges in entering the U.S. market?
We've covered several of them. Let me think if there's any other ones. I mean, I always say you need to think like an American. You need to be the best. If you're not the best, you need to say you're the best, Another piece of advice when selling is you need to justify your commitment for your expansion by having a U.S. office, by having U.S. customers. And so when you're in the process of that expansion, if you have U.S. customers, you need to make sure you are reassuring your clients of your commitment to this expansion. Because if it takes a long time, they know you're still working on it. And so they're not chasing you for that information. So I think reassuring your clients of the commitment, reassuring your investors of your commitment to expand to the US, keeping them in the loop, letting them know where you're at, asking for help. Asking for help is huge. I mean, as I said earlier, Americans are not afraid to ask for help. And I think other countries that's just not part of the culture. But I think that you can ask for help here. You absolutely can.
Excellent. And I should just let people know I am seeing any questions that are put in. So please don't hesitate to put in additional questions, but we'll keep going down our list here. So we've got, yeah, and we talked a little bit about this question, but not the specific question. So the question is, how do we adapt our message to the US market without diluting our brand?
Okay. To be honest with this, I don't see the problem. I don't see many people experience problems with diluting their brand when they come to the US, when they change any messaging that needs to be done. My only advice really is to test your messaging in the market. Ask feedback from average Americans like me. Ask feedback from prospective clients. Because at the end of the day, it's really not what you think about your marketing or your product. It's about what the market you're trying to enter things.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, in wherever your home country is, let's assume the UK, the buyer persona you have and the message you have may translate, or you may, at least what we find, it may be different buyer personas, different roles within whatever industries, and the value proposition they realize may be different. So we quite often find that it's best to test those assumptions. Yeah, and the brand likely stays consistent, but it's, you know, sort of the message or the value prop to those buyer personas or targets that should evolve, because they're unique and they probably evolve in different regions of the country and as you sell to different industries or different customer segments. So let's see. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about hiring, but maybe not this specifically. So frustrations. Let's talk a little bit about sort of frustrations in hiring and team recruitment. What are some of the frustrations that you see happen as companies are hiring and recruiting U.S. folks?
So I think the frustrations really come out of not hiring help, not investing in an accountant or an HR advisor that can support and give you advice. Because I think a lot of the problems come from companies that are looking to hire their first hire will put out a job description and get very little or not great response from it. And if you get that advice beforehand, you get the advice on what really appeals to Americans, what they get excited about. Like if you're targeting millennials, like speak in their language. If you're targeting someone that might be a little bit more senior in their career, speak to their language as well. You need to make sure also that your package, the employee benefits package, is really competitive. The thing is if you're deciding to set up in New York or San Francisco, you're competing with all the other companies in New York and San Francisco for that talent. So you really need to do everything you can to stand out, and it's getting the salary right, getting everything, that the amount of leave you're giving, making that competitive, getting all that right from the beginning is really important.
Cool. And yeah, and you allude to sort of a brand of professionals we have here that just specialize in helping companies create their all of their employment packages and their employee handbooks and all those kinds of things. That's great. So we're going to go maybe just a little bit rapid fire here on some of these. Let's see. I'm just doing a quick look. Oh, this is an interesting one. So how do you manage expectations when entering the U.S. Or the overly high expectations on the part of entrepreneurs? So I think this is both from the perspective of how do we manage the expectations of our team and maybe our investors to managing the expectations of maybe your clients, Blair, as they look at the, sort of the mermaid out in the water, and they don't swim out and drown. So let's take the first one, is sort of how should a company or a leader manage the expectations of their team and or investors?
So it's just being really transparent. So I think managing your expectations to them is just being really open with what you're able to do, the money you have to do it, the support you need. And it's just being incredibly transparent and not trying to do it all on your own. And I think having buy-in from everyone before you get started is really important. As far as me managing expectations of entrepreneurs is something that, I think I'm really excited when companies want to look at the US, but I have to spend a lot of time getting them to understand the size of this market. So as you'll know, several of the US states are just as big as different countries, So this market is just so big. And I also spend a lot of time managing expectations of, what you'll get on the East Coast versus what you'll get on the West Coast. So that's what I spend a lot of time on. I also am just one person with my own opinions. So I always, while I have spoken to so many clients and gotten a lot of examples, and I do understand this, I do recommend that people speak to other people. Lastly, like I always say when I manage expectations, it's going to take longer than you think, and it's going to cost more than you think. Always. Yeah, everyone agrees with that. Right. Always, yeah.
No, and it's hard necessarily to measure the unknowns, and every industry has them. Yeah, and I guess to your point, and this may be something not so many people know, is the I think even just looking at one of our states, California, they're either the 5th or 6th largest economy
in the world. And the UK fits inside Texas.
Yeah, I mean, Texas, New York State, Florida, Georgia. I mean, there's some massive economies for sure. Yeah. So, and Boston's emerging very quickly right now as well. So here's more of a statement, but I'd love to get your reaction to this. So it's, I think, a real interesting statement. So many companies attempt to launch an own operation without fully assessing the opportunities, challenges, expenses, and risks of going it alone. And the next sentence, strategic collaboration with the right U.S. partner can be a perfect option to accelerate growth. Do you have thoughts on this statement?
Yes, no, I mean, I completely agree with that. If you have a partner in the market, completely take advantage of that. I mean, I also, if you have someone that is willing to give you some office space for a little while. So, I just met with a company the other day that is within one of their investors' space. They actually have taken 2 desks within there, and they're not paying money yet for the next few months because they weren't scared to ask for those desks. There are several companies I know that are sitting within their clients. Their clients have said, we really want you over here, and we'll let you sit in our office for a little bit. A lot of those are like film production companies and that kind of thing. But take advantage of those opportunities. And if you have partners or friends and companies that you partner with in the UK and they're in the US, it can translate completely. Yeah.
That's really cool. So we are getting in some additional questions online here. So Tammy Dietz says, Blair mentioned recruiting and mentoring to help businesses in the beginning. Can you elaborate on that, Blair?
Sure. So I think that was when I was talking about the support that we provide as a program. A lot of work that I do is through connecting founders and the companies I work with potential mentors. So people who've set up successfully in the US before, people who know a lot about marketing in the US or a lot about HR. I hope that answers the question. As far as recruitment, I think what I do to support companies and what you can also do if you have partners or friends in market is get them to help you amplify your job descriptions. Get some of your friends to send out a link to the job description on their LinkedIn. You're just doubling and tripling the network you're reaching. And when you have an American or someone like, a company in the US that's validating like you like that, it means a lot.
That makes total sense. And I think even to sort of add one thing to what you're saying, you had earlier on, you had mentioned networking, and even sort of whether it's in New York or any region of the country, there are massive networks and just tons and tons of, every industry has lots of opportunity for network, or even just generally in the entrepreneurship ecosystems in each community. All of those situations have mentors embedded in them, or whether they're casual or programmatic. But yeah, tons of opportunity to connect with many mentors, be it industry or sort of geographic experts that could help in so many different ways. And it's a very normal part of our ecosystem, and people quite often mentor for more than one organization at a time. Mentorship is a kind of a core component of what we're doing.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to reach out on LinkedIn to people that you think would be interesting to speak to. People really like that, especially if you don't want anything from them but their advice, and to talk to them. And then if you're in France, reach out to the consulate here. They have people here to support, and they will know the French founders that are on the ground here that have experienced a lot of success and are willing and open to share that knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just, I think the biggest point here is get out of your comfort zone.
Just exactly.
Reach out, because that's the hardest thing is walking up to someone you don't know or emailing somebody you don't know, but doing it is key. So let's go to the next question. Lance Scott says, great discussion regarding being prepared for the high cost of getting started. The question is, Blair, do you provide clients with a ballpark range of costs in dollars or pounds to get started in the US?
No, but I have partners, and I know a lot of people in New York who can give you ballparks in those areas. So the Mayor's International Business Program has specific partners. So we partner with law firms like Wilson Sonsini and Taylor Wessing and KPMG. And so they'll give companies some time and give them those ballparks. However, I'm on the ground in the US, and I have so many colleagues here that work for the British government, work for the French government, all over, that have those service providers who are so eager to work with international companies coming in market. They will give you those ballparks. They will get for free. They will give you some advice for free because they want to win your business. So take advantage and have those conversations. If you're ready to investigate in that area, ask away, and we can make those introductions. And offline, there are some questions here that have been asked that are very specific, like accountants and lawyers would be able to answer. If those companies that have asked those questions need those introductions, I'm very happy to make them.
Cool. And what I'm going to do, and that's a good segue to there are probably one or two questions that they're maybe more suited to me. But when we do the follow-up with this webinar, just so everybody knows, probably later today or first thing in the morning tomorrow, you'll get an email with the link to the recording, and also Blair will be copied in, CC'd, so it'll be easy to connect with her directly if you have additional questions, and certainly you can connect with me as well. Let me just take a quick crack at answering two questions, and then we'll throw it back to you, Blair, for any final comments. So the question, the first step to entry is often a sales office, but there's little support for this kind of entry. And so there are actually a lot of ways to enter the US. Certainly you think about a sales office, and Blair had talked about bringing somebody in from your company into the US, maybe as a preferred first step for many companies. We're actually we have two clients right now that our company is their only presence in the US. And as we get traction, they'll bring someone in and hire. So we're actually doing the early market tests, establishing, getting the first clients going. There are others of us, if you will, and there are a lot of ways to sort of do that. But so my point here isn't at all to position us as a solution, but to say there are a variety of alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
And for some companies, one solution is better than another. And it's just a matter of sort of figuring out what makes sense. Some are a little higher risk. Some can be, much more variable and scalable. Again, it just depends on what fits a particular situation. So, but I think all the variables that Blair talked about all make sense. Both where your customers are, the proximity to, to time zones and distance from the home office. I think it's a whole bunch of variables that should go into that formula to decide how to build your first sales office and where it should be. Then other question, just to give a quick answer to, we have a successful trade show strategy in our home country. What do we need to consider doing differently in the U.S.? I think Blair hit some of this when generally talking about marketing. Ultimately, entering a new country is a bit of an opportunity to do things different. And a lot of what we work on with clients and what we found works really well. There's a tendency when you come to the U.S., because we have an enormous, sort of trade show marketplace, is to find the big event or a couple big events in your industry, whether it's Bio or CES or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's almost going to Las Vegas, and in some cases it is going to Las Vegas. But you see people pushing their marketing budget sort of to one number and sort of betting it all. And we actually, with clients, will only, in the first 6 and maybe even 12 months, only do local and regional events, of which there are many in every industry, for a bunch of reasons. But we can do a lot of A/B testing. We can validate who we're selling to. We can validate what messaging is most attractive and appropriate for them, and what offers compel them to convert. And in doing that, when we actually expand it and go to the bigger events, we're going to be much more effective. Also, what we learn ends up informing what's on the website, what's on the marketing collateral, how the salespeople communicate. So again, not one answer to this, but it's awful nice to grow quickly and build that network quickly, and not have to travel and have those huge budgets, but you can actually sleep in your own bed at night. And again, a lot of the marketplaces in the U.S. are dense enough and have a rich enough sort of event schedule that you can do that, or at least a 2-hour train ride or something like that, and again, be back in your own bed at night. So Blair, I know we're kind of right at the end of our time here, but a final thought or final question, something you want to make sure people know about entering the U.S. that is, kind of the real key.
I mean, it's kind of what you were saying a little bit earlier. There's a magic wand to do this. It's, the path isn't going to be straight in order to set up. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, but you can do it. But just expect it, I'll reiterate this, it's going to take longer than you think, and it's going to be more expensive than you think. And so make sure that you've taken proper precautions on both budget and that you have the time before you get started. That's really it.
That's fantastic. Well, it couldn't have been more fun, Blair. You were fantastic.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to see you.
Yeah, same here. And we really appreciate you taking the time being with us today. Again, just to make sure everybody knows, we'll follow up with this recording, and please give us feedback. Let us know how this was for you. Blair and I have already talked about doing another one of these to answer some of the legal questions that were here, and maybe Blair will join us again, and we'll bring an attorney in where we can address some of those issues, because there were some very specific, whether it's patent or competitive landscape, everything from compliance type questions that get very, as Blair said, very specific. But we'll address those offline, and also potentially look at additional webinars of a similar ilk. But please give us your feedback. Let us know, and when you see the recording, click like and things like that. It always helps with the algorithm. So again, thank you, Blair. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and let us know how we can help.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Bye.